Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1991 Score football release. 1991 was the last year that Score made two releases for football, Series 1 and Series 2. Not that they'd done that for very long. They'd done it in 1990, and then they did it here in 1991. But the reason I wanted to note it is because in 1992, other sets like Pro Set and Upper Deck and Pacific, they would also have their last Series 1 and Series 2 releases because football was too crowded. And so card companies began scaling back in football, whereas over in baseball, they were ramping things up. So with Score, they were kind of ahead of the curve in terms of getting away from two series releases. But in 1991, they still felt that they could do that. And the design for 1991 was very impressive because Score had been in a heated race with Pro Set all the way through 1991 and not really into 1992. But in 1989, when Score came over into football, they wanted to really emphasize the images. And when they got there, they realized there was a company called Pro Set doing exactly the same thing, but in a different way. Score had a very simplified design with a very simple and bold image. Pro Set had a more complex design with a more complex image. So in 1990, both companies were really hoping to stake their claim on football, so they both ramped up their designs. In the case of Score, they shifted over to making a more complex design with a more complex image. Not really complex, but more complex. Well, at the same time, Pro Set made a more simplified design with a more simplified image. In a way, they almost kind of swapped places in terms of how they approached their cards, but in both cases, they made amazing cards. And so they were racing forward in making just really impressive cards at a greater rate than anybody else in the hobby, including what Score was doing in hockey and in baseball. So 1991 was a big year because both Score and Pro Set had to step even beyond what they'd done in 1990. And while Pro Set did a good job of refining their cards, Score made a major leap forward, making a card that is really one of the all-time greats. I mean, this is a card that is, again, really focused on images, but the border does a great job of really focusing in on that great image. And they use a color fade from a really strong, rich color on one side to white on the other, where so much of the border is a color that the whole card has a much richer strength to how it comes across. But then over on the card back, the border on the back is a metallic gold, which makes the card look really, really impressive and exquisite. In a way, more so even than their elite brand of Pinnacle that they released the same year. Interesting that they put that it was almost as if Score was a more impressive card than Pinnacle. In certain ways, of course, because in other ways it's a very blunt card, especially with the fade being a horizontal fade where the card is imbalanced one side or the other, which for anybody who is OCD, it's really annoying. But at any rate, that's the way that they designed the card. Really nice design. But Score had always had a tradition of releasing a different color border for every 110 cards. They did it in baseball in 88, 89, 90, 91, 92. In football, they did it in 89, 90. In hockey, well, okay, in hockey they didn't, but hockey was always approached in a different way. Now, in 1990, when Score released their football release with Series 1 and Series 2, they repeated the colors. In the case of 1991, they went ahead and followed what they did with Score, where they had different colors in Series 2 they had in Series 1. The first 110 cards have a blue border or blue theme, and then the second group has red, and the third group in Series 1 has green. So it's blue, red, and green. Those are the three colors. And in the green group, they have subsets, and they also have a couple of rookies, like they'd done in 1990 and technically in 89. And here, because the draft had not happened yet, they were taking rookies that they thought would be pretty familiar with people, and that gave them the opportunity or the excuse to make a card of Kenny Walker. Kenny Walker was a deaf player who was really good at playing the defensive end position. And so he was a really interesting prospect. Not a high prospect, but an interesting prospect. And so Score got the opportunity to make a card dedicated to him. I'm not going to go into the subset cards here, though. I want to talk about those when I get into the subsets of Series 2. So for Series 1, those were the three colors. That was the way the set was built. And then in Series 2, they started the card set off with orange borders, and then the second group was black, and then the third group, which was mostly rookies, was purple. There are a couple of veterans in the purple group, but most of the cards are rookies. And regarding those rookies, the way that the rookie design is obviously the same as in Series 1, just with the purple border. They do have the name specified on the card back. And I will also note there are two rookies that show up at the end of the black series. So almost all the rookies are purple. But this card set got really heavy into subsets. Very heavy. And the three subsets, one of the subsets for Series 1 I'm going to talk about at the end, but the other two start off with the 90 Plus Club. These are players who have scored touchdowns on 90 yards or more, so a lot of return men, but also quarterback, wide receiver combinations. These cards do not have a border. Instead, they have a white background that runs off the sides with a green football field for the background behind the player. These look very impressive, and well, this is kind of indicative for the way that most of the subsets are done without worrying about the card border. They also had a set for the league leaders, and a couple of these cards appeared in Series 1. Most of them appeared in Series 2. These are art cards which show a collage of images of each player featured for whichever leader statistic they're associated with. And then in Series 2, the big subset for Series 2 was their team MVP cards. Now every single team, all 28 teams, there's one card dedicated to each team, and this is the player who was the most impressive on the team. So not necessarily the superstar, so like we actually do have kickers in this set, or like in the case here with the Chiefs, instead of using Derek Thomas, who'd had an all-time great season, they used Steve DeBerg. And each one of these cards has a stipple art design on the front, which is not garish. It's really quite nice, but it is definitely kind of toned down. But there is a nice cohesiveness to the way that this subset works because all the cards have the same art approach. And the teams are laid out in alphabetical order, but by the team name, not by the city name. So it starts with the Bears and it ends with the Vikings, as it should. Now they also have a subset called Crunch Crew, which is basically a carryover from 1990. In fact, this is one of only two subsets that is carried over from 1990. This uses the normal card border, like the 1990 set design had done. Here in 1991, they used the purple design, and they have the same comic book explosion type design behind the player. But they also did a different set that was also about the defense called Sack Attack, which is kind of in the spirit of the Rocketmen cards from 1990. Here they have a radar with football green for the background, but it's also monitor green. For those of us who remember that monitors were green at the time, this fits perfectly in, but it is a really good color theme to make the player stand out. It works really well. And they also did cards of the Hall of Famers, again, like they'd done in 1990. But in this case, they toned the card down so that it's really the image that comes through on these cards. But each one of the Hall of Fame inductees for 1991 were featured, or I guess they were inductees of 1990. They were all featured in this little subset. And then there are three standalone cards that are of note. The first one is Rookie of the Year. So this features both Rookies of the Year. Emmitt Smith was the Offensive Rookie of the Year, and then Mark Carrier was the Defensive Rookie of the Year. So they did this as a standalone card, which was different from what they'd done in the previous year. They also did a card for Marcus Dupree, who was the Comeback Player of the Year, which is an award that is, well, it's usually overlooked. So I really like that they took the time to give Marcus a card here in this set, because they didn't even do the league MVP, but they did do Man of the Year. So Warren Moon shows up on the Man of the Year card with a really great image that looks more like a 1992 Pro Line Profiles card than a card in 1991 Score. Great looking card, really impressive. And then to close out the set, and to really close out both series, is their Dream Team cards. Now, Dream Team was something they started to do in baseball in 1990. In football, they had All Pros. But the idea of Score Dream Team cards is it's kind of like Score's choice of the best players at every single position, or most impressive. I'm not sure exactly what the concept was, but the idea was all 25 positions were represented here in this card set. And by 25, I mean there were 11 defensive players, 11 offensive players, and three cards totaling 4 different players for special teams: kicker, punter, and special teams specialist. So the card set, the way that these cards were laid out is each card set was 330 cards, plus they had the Dream Team cards tacked in at the end of the set, which elongated the set. And every single card, oh my word, I mean these are among the greatest cards ever, period. It's incredible these cards aren't even glossy, and yet they come across looking like they are glossy because the deep richness of the black is so strong. But the images, the way they pulled off these images with headshots, no shirt, so you see a little bit of the shoulders of every single player, but it just fades into the black of the card. It's so up close, it's so personal, it's so powerful. A nice little image of the cutout shot of the player, also featured on the card. And these cards came out at the exact same time that Don Russ was releasing Studio, or a little bit later in the year. But the Don Russ Studio cards pale so much in comparison to these cards, which are just absolutely incredible. And again, Series 1 had defensive players as well as the special teamers. So Series 2 is where they featured their offensive players, the Dream Team for offense, all 11 players, no coaches. But this also cues me into talking about inserts. Now, Score had never really bothered with inserts. They had always had their trivia cards, except in hockey when they launched in 1990, they didn't have trivia cards, and in football they gave up in 1990, so it was only 89 and part of 1990. In baseball they would continue through 1992, but in 1991 they weren't bothering with inserts, setting aside hot cards, which I'll get to in a second, but those were in blister packs. In regular packs, they didn't. Only in 1991 they did, and that was specifically in the Series 2 of Score Football, where they inserted autograph cards. And the autographs were of the Dream Team players. So all 11 of the offensive players have signed copies of their cards. Now, the way you know these autographs is when you look at the Dream Team card, just the regular Dream Team, you'll notice that on the back they have a signature on it. For the autographs, they don't have the signature, that facsimile signature. They leave that blank. Some of the players did sign their name there where the autograph would go. Other players signed it on the front, but you can tell the difference between the facsimile cards, or the facsimile autographs, and the regular autographs because it's easy to get the facsimile autographs, and so you can compare that way. But there is no facsimile autograph on the back of these autographed cards. That's the way you can tell the difference. And they're pretty rare. Only 500 copies of each, which means these pale in comparison to the large number of autographs that were released with each of the Upper Deck releases. In this case, even though the bulk number of autographs available is pretty comparable, the individual, these are very, very rare for that era. And they're also very rare in terms of Score was among the first companies ever to do in-pack autographs. They started off in 1990 with Star Picks and also with Upper Deck. By 1991, you had added Pro Line, and we were about to see them in Fleer in basketball later on in the year. But this is about it. These are among the very first all time of in-pack autographs here with Score. Now, like I said, they did have hot cards in blister packs, and for the 1991 football release, it was their hot rookies. These cards are not bright red like we're used to with hot cards. but these are bold all the same. So they're definitely not cards that are interested in disappearing into the background. They're very, very showy. But also, they did have another small set, a 4-card set, that was released with their factory sets. So if you bought a complete set, factory set, you got 4 additional cards, B1 through B4, showcasing the winners of the Super Bowl, which was the New York Giants. Better luck next year, Buffalo Bills. So that's where those cards come from. And then they did continue their tradition of a score supplemental set, or in this case it's called traded. These cards are the same design as the main cards in the set, all 110 cards. They have a teal color for them, and the cards are numbered 1 through 110, but they all have a T number at the end. Not that you're going to miss out with the teal color, it looks very clear. But this is to showcase all the same rookies that were in the set, now in their college or in their pro uniforms, and a couple of traded cards. And that was sold as a complete set in a box, complete in a box. And then they also released their young superstars again. These cards were also released. These were in blister packs. They were released only in complete set form, and you can see that Score is now starting to get into that world of pop art for the early to mid 90s. This is a card that has very bold colors with very bold angles, and it has kind of a fake marble pattern for the blue around the player. And the back is not going to take no for an answer. That will burn your retinas off. But there was one other thing they released in 1991 for Score for football, and that was a promo set that was released at a couple of events, the National and the Confectionery Convention. If you want to know the full name, I said it in the 1991 Score baseball set. I'm not going to try to remember for this video, but at any rate, this is a small 10-card set. These cards have a pajama pattern design at the top and at the bottom, and all 10 cards were released at both events. The cards are identical. It's just that on the back, down at the bottom of that sash, there is very difficult to read text that says either the National Convention or the TCMA, I think it's TCMA, for the other event. So if you're trying to collect these cards, you'll need to look on the bottom to figure out which of the 2 cards you have, so you know which one to get otherwise. And that was 1991. So for 1991, Score really hit its height. This was the best the Score would ever be. The Score baseball set coming up in 1992 is a really impressive card, but this card, the 1991 card, has just a certain quality to it that makes it a true all-timer. Very, very impressive set. 1992 for football, though, would be a huge transition, and I'm not even going to talk anymore about it at this point. I'm just going to focus that on the video that will be coming up next for football releases, obviously 1992 Score. So definitely look out for that video. If you haven't seen the 89 and 1990 Score videos, I've already done those videos, so definitely check those out. If you haven't subscribed already, I do urge you to do so. And thank you very much for watching.